Okay, so my name is Rebecca Newberry. I work with the Clean Air Coalition of Western New York. We're a membership-based organization. We do most of our work in Tonawanda with residents who live and work in the industrial and manufacturing corridor right on the river. And we also do work on the Lower West Side with residents who live around the Peace Bridge Plaza. So I'm not a climate change expert. I'll just be totally honest. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who know way more about climate change than I do. But just as an overview for this 15 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about how climate change is affecting us regionally, but then get more into what we can do, more on the ground work that our organization and other organizations do. So we know that climate change is an increase in the atmosphere, right, to carbon dioxide and methane. These gases absorb heat. We know that in addition to that, there's an increase in water, right? So our water system's affected. We know water holds moisture when it's heated, and this increases evaporation, precipitation, precipitation. I wish it increased precipitation. Precipitation, and that increases this extremes in weather that we're seeing. And this affects nationally us differently, right? So we're going to see different weather patterns, obviously, in the Northeast as we do in the Southwest. I don't think I have to really get into the details here. People know that, we see an increase in hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and how this affects communities. With Hurricane Sandy, all of the homes that were destroyed. Personally, I have friends that were affected by that weather, and how this impacts people's health. We see an increase in mold when we see those types of weather extremes and that kind of thing. So I really want to talk about how this impacts our health, because that's what our organization works on and that's what we do. So what do we see when heat increases? I don't know, how are folks affected by heat increases? Okay, yeah.
Irritable.
You get irritable, there's a...
More living things survive and transmit disease.
Okay, can you be more explicit?
No.
Living things, so living things like... Insects, okay.
Bacteria.
Bacteria,
Stuff
great.
that would normally freeze and die in the winter doesn't.
Awesome, great. Rodents in my, I have rodents in my house right now. Anyone else? Viruses, okay, so we're looking at things that affect us internally, but also quality of life issues and things that transmit disease externally, right? So also heart issues, so if you have heart problems and it's hot out, you get more stressed out, you get more irritable. It also affects, it's stressful on the body, heat is stressful on the body. In addition to that, respiratory issues. So, it's hot out, if you have asthma or if you have other respiratory conditions, heat makes it harder to breathe. And then when we're looking at these weather situations, you have a natural disaster in your area. If you're sick, it's harder to move, right? It's harder to get health care. It's harder, it's harder to get out. And so we're seeing this not only affect our environment, but affecting our families, affecting our health, and that kind of thing. So what do we do? So I hate the word mitigation. I think it's confusing, but it's up there. And so there's two ways of really working in climate change, right? At my organization and with the folks that I work with, we talk more about health impacts because we think that that's more relevant to most people and most people's lives than this big thing that is climate change. Climate change can be debated, right? We see it all the time. Health really can't be. And so when you talk about people's health and you talk about people being sick, which is in effect of pollution, it's harder to debate that. And it's easier to fight and champion for change if we're talking about real people's lives and how they're affected. Our vision, and again we said we're a membership-based organization, so we have people in communities and people in workplaces that are fighting for their lives. We envision a world where our policies and the decisions that are made are democratically decided on by communities that they're impacting and workplaces that they're impacting. So when we're talking about climate change and kind of bringing it down to the local level, we're looking at air pollution, right? So air pollution causes climate change. And the majority of air pollution, and I know that the gentleman before did a very nice job talking about transportation, and that's a big part of it, but 52% of air pollution is caused by industrial sources. So we're looking at, manufacturing sources. We're looking at pollution that's coming from coal plants and burning fossil fuels. We're looking at sources such as chemical companies, all the slew of industry that we have here still. And I talked a little bit about health impacts, but are folks familiar with bad air days? You heard that term? Yeah. Were you going to say something like that? Just you know about it. So bad air days, right? So when pollution causes that haze and that sticky feeling, those days affect our health. Those impact our health. And then we're also seeing high rates of cancer. So environmental pollution also has links to cancer. And we see this in Tonawanda in the west side. So what we do, we run campaigns against companies, agencies, and authorities that perpetuate environmental justice. So, it's not just the folks that are spewing the chemicals into our air, it's also the people that let them. We develop grassroots resident leaders. So we work to support communities that are doing this work. We facilitate resident-based research and then share the results with the communities. So health issues in Tonawanda. So Tonawanda, New York, for folks that aren't familiar. Is anyone here from Tonawanda? Yeah, all right. So Tonawanda, New York has 53 major air pollution sources in a 4 miles square radius. So we're looking actually right now at the Coffin, James, and Sawyer neighborhood. So there's about 325 families that live up against those companies. And folks probably have heard of the Tonawanda Coke Company, the Coke manufacturer. So that's actually the 3 stacks. So in Tonawanda, New York, the Department of Health last year released a study that showed that cancer rates are higher than any other, higher than average. There's an extremely high rate of leukemia, high rate of esophageal cancer, and nasal pharynx cancer. And these cancers are particularly around the wind pattern from the industrial area. We know that there's higher rates than average of asthma and other respiratory issues. There's also a lot of worker exposure at these plants as well. We've got the world's largest sponge making factory in Tonawanda, 3M. We also have a couple chemical companies, FMC and DuPont. And there's a lot of issues around exposures to workers. And then on the Lower West Side, are folks familiar with the work on the Lower West Side, asthma? Who lives on the Lower West Side? Okay, wow. Where are y'all from? All right. So on the Lower West Side, we have higher than average rates of asthma and respiratory issues. We also have the nation's 3rd largest land port, which is the Peace Bridge Plaza. So we've got trucks coming in and out of the neighborhood, high rate of diesel exhaust, and we know that diesel exhaust contains benzene, like manufacturing emissions, but also is a cancer, it's a carcinogen and causes asthma. So we have, the health issues, and then we have the big picture climate change stuff. So what do we need to do to reduce pollution, to reduce the effect on the global climate, but also just protect people's health? One of the ways we collect evidence is through citizen science. So this is where folks actually go out and do their own research and then use that research to advocate for change with decision makers. So there's ways of doing this. You see the fellow with the suspenders over there? That guy's named Ron Malik. He used to work at Honeywell. He calls himself a former polluter. So he's doing an air test. It's a 3-minute bucket test that just does a read of the air and tests for VOCs and other hazardous chemicals. We then use that data to then fight for pollution prevention and that kind of thing, and enforcement action. We also are doing a texting campaign, both on the Lower West Side and in Tonawanda, where folks can text in if they see an idling truck, if they see a big plume of smoke. Usually when it's really dark, that's not good. When it comes out of it's not supposed to be like that. And we also have a technical team, which I was talking to Mike, right? I was talking to you about this earlier. So we've got a group of former engineers and current plant employees that go through some of the air permits and that kind of thing, and try to find ways to legally work in different types of pollution prevention and monitoring that can happen at the plant. And then I talked a little bit about truck counting with texting, but we also count trucks. So how many trucks are going through a neighborhood, that kind of thing. So the long story short is that, you know, the community needs to identify these solutions. In Tonawanda, we're doing three pieces. We're doing pollution prevention in the plants, where we're fighting for actual equipment that can bring down pollution in manufacturing plant, whether that be scrubbers, recycling equipment, that kind of thing. We also have to really look at land use and planning, and this comes into play both in Tonawanda and West Side and other parts of Buffalo, is we have to stop putting neighborhoods next to pollution sources, and I'm not sure why anyone thought that was a good idea. And I understand people have to work there, but you know, when you put a street and then 10 feet away you put a plant, or you put a street and 10 feet away you put a plaza, or you put homes right next to a crusher, a concrete crusher, that's not a good idea. So we have to stop doing that. And the more people, the closer you are in proximity to a pollution source, the more your health is going to be affected. And we also have to look at enforcement. You know, government authorities have to start doing their jobs. And there is this idea that we have these agencies that constantly protect people. And if you live in communities where you're not being protected, you have a different idea. That's not really the reality of the situation. So we're constantly calling on agencies to do their jobs. And on the west side, again, the community needs to identify the solutions. The solutions to people's health problems can't be coming from Albany or from DC or from people that don't live in the community. One of the ideas that we had on the west side was, the residents had on the west side, was to put in these things called truck stop electrification stations, where the trucks in the plaza actually are hooked up to a equipment that keeps the cab running without the engine running. So basically there's no exhaust, but yet the driver can stay warm and that kind of thing. So it cuts down on exhaust and that kind of thing. Also green buffers, we're fighting for green buffers. So basically, because residents' homes are so close to the pollution source, putting in buffers such as trees or bamboo or something to block the particulates and the chemicals coming across. And then also obviously continuous monitoring. So that's it. I'm watching my time. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you folks after this.